Welcome to the Water Trough, where we can't make you drink, but we will make you think. My name is Ed Drozda, the Small Business Doctor, and I'm really excited you chose to join me here as we discuss topics that are important for small business folks just like you. If you're looking for ideas, inspiration, and possibility, you've come to the right place. Join us as we take steps to help you create the healthy business that you've always wanted. Welcome back, folks. This is Ed Drozda, the Small Business Doctor, and I want to welcome you today to the Water Trough, where I'm joined by Paul Cronin. Paul has over 30 years of professional experience in sales management, consulting, and entrepreneurship. He's owned 3 businesses, including a data analytics business, a golf training business, and an exit planning consulting business. He's been a part of the M&A world since 2009, initially in the exit planning field before moving to transactional work at several firms. And most recently, Paul joined the M&A practice at Touchstone Advisors in 2025. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Ed. So great to be here again.
It's great to have you back, Paul. I was really looking forward to bringing you back. The business of mergers and acquisitions is important to business owners, but one of the things that I was hoping we would be able to talk about today is that unique set of characters who are in small businesses, my kind of clientele, who are perhaps asking the question, does this matter to me? Is there something for me to sell, or does it really make any difference? And I will start by pointing out a person like myself. I'm a solopreneur. I am a small business coach. And so at the end of days, for me, I really have nothing to sell. That is, you don't sell a book of business when you, the principal, are the principal, the principal thing behind it. I can't sell a book to somebody else. They won't be me, so the clients aren't going to get the same thing or what have you. In my case, it's too small to be appropriate. I think a lot of small business people think their business is too small to care about M&A. So let's talk about that. Is a small business too small to care?
No, the short answer, the longer answer depends on the nature of the business. And the way I describe it is a buyer would consider buying your business if they believe with a reasonable amount of risk that they can replicate your results. It's true that people who are in the art of coaching, business consulting, or consulting in general, where you're a solopreneur, it's so dependent on your thoughts that it would be difficult for somebody to replicate that. It doesn't mean it's completely impossible, but it would require transition time where a new person comes in, they learn the process, get clients, and that might allow you to quote unquote retire and hand off so the brand can carry away. It doesn't mean there's much of a financial transaction from that. The other way is if you've got a methodology that others could replicate, write it down, turn it into a book, turn it into tools, assessments, what have you. And then you've got a toolkit that you can sell. Again, I'm not an attorney, but there's different ways to package it up and sell it. I call it products plus training, for example. That's one of the businesses that I had, and we were able to take that exit planning practice and then sell it to a number of people so that they could independently use the tools plus the training we offer. However, setting that aside, there are a lot of small businesses, a convenience store. You've got inventory, you probably have some part-time employees, you've got vendors, and a convenience store, you tend to have a lot of regular customers. It's near the bus stop, it's in the neighborhood, whatever the case may be. So it isn't a particular high barrier to entry other than you've got to have the spot, right? The city or town has to zone that particular place for that activity. If you've got those things and it pays you some sort of an income and there's some sort of profits, and those two could be combined for a very small business, you can say, yeah, you could take over. My joke is, this is how I make the sausage. Every business owner I talk to, tell me how you make the sausage. Everyone makes it a little differently and they get it. So every industry has a history of those kinds of businesses having been sold. And then folks like myself use the data, there's these large databases, and we take a look at that. We take a look at the financials of your business, and can someone replicate those results? The price they're willing to pay has a combination of the value, the income that an owner, a buyer, could receive from it, and the risk they're willing to pay to take it over, and can they replicate those results?
Let me focus for a moment on the word replicate. I'd presume if one is driven by the ability to replicate, then they are attracted to what it is you're doing in the first place. I don't want to replicate that which is not good. I certainly wouldn't want to buy something that is not good. So how does one position themselves outwardly to motivate the desire to replicate?
Well, first you have to make profits, right? Sounds remarkably simple, right?
Oh, maybe not.
As you know too well, it can be hard. Showing in your financials, in your tax returns, and in the bank statements that it all backs up, that I make $100,000 a year from this business. That's a combination of the income and profits I may take, draws, whatever you want to call it. Again, these are very small businesses. And let's say you do $500,000 a year, you keep $100,000 profit. If you show that consistently and you are smart about your expenses and you're not doing what I call the silly things, which a lot of people do, they replace the windows in their house and they call it supplies. Don't do that and silly stuff. If you're able to do those things, that's a starting point. I can prove through my financials and my tax returns and multiple my bank statements that this is how much profit anyone running this business, take it over for me, should be able to do. The second part is going back to how you make the sausage. Do you actually write it down? This is how we attract customers. We have these Facebook ads or postcards or whatever marketing is to attract people. That you have a financial system or books or something similar to that, that you pay your employees, that you're not paying the money and maybe keeping the taxes or not paying the taxes. You pay all your sales taxes. I want to keep using this convenience store as an example. Keep your inventory current. If 30% of your inventory has passed sell-by date, well, that in terms of a buyer, it's worthless. So it gets a concern of, geez, they don't turn over their inventory very well.
Right.
Well, that's a problem. So those are just a few things to think about, but all of them is, can you show consistent level of profitability? Whatever it is. Buyers, they're like water. They seek their own level. Some need 100,000 a year. Some need 100 million a year. All depends who's the buyer.
I understand that looking for something to replicate, i.e. to continue working in a profitable manner, is a motivator. I tend to look at profitability as, I'm going to go out on a limb here because the way I'm going to say it's going to sound weird. I see it as evidence of a deeper purpose. While a buyer might be attracted to the profitability of a company, are there other things that they're looking at, or are there potentially other things that we as potential sellers might want to keep in mind? If I had two companies to potentially buy, both of whom are making the same profit, and assuming that for the moment the buyer, had the capability of doing whatever either of these companies is currently doing, what further stuff is going to drive me? How am I going to choose?
If I had an ability to understand why buyers buy businesses, my goodness, they all have their own criteria. Ultimately, they're all trying to get to the risk of buying the business. What risk am I willing to take to buy this business? And how do I, as the buyer, reduce that risk? Examples might include having the seller sign a contract for 18 to 36 months post-close. It might mean stay bonuses for key managers. It might mean paying out a price for the business over time based upon some metric of customers staying and so forth. So that's part of the reason why people buy businesses.
So let's go back to the convenience store. One buyer could say, I've never run a convenience store before. I'm going to need training. That will be a part of the transaction. How much training you're going to have to give to the buyer. Buyer number 2 could be someone who owns 14 convenience stores. They are looking at, hey, I've always wanted a convenience store down the street from my college, all those kids walking by, I can never get a good spot. And rather than waiting for a vacant spot to open and I have to put my brand in and spend a lot of money awareness, I'm just going to buy Joe's convenience store because the kids all stop by there anyway because they get their coffee or vapes or whatever else they're buying these days. All we have to do is announce that Joe's convenience store is going to become the equivalent of a 7-Eleven or what have you, right? And so there's that transition. That person, buyer 2, might be willing to pay more than buyer 1 because they're not going to run the store. And if you as an owner may make $100,000 of profit out of that business, the buyer could say, I'm just going to have a store manager run that and I'll pay them $60,000 plus some kind of benefits or whatever. And so you look at the seller and say, there's $100,000 of profits in the business. And that buyer could say, geez, it's really only $40,000 to me. And then you get into the weeds. And the weeds could be, wait a minute, I pay a lawyer and I pay accountant and I have all these other expenses. All right. All those go to zero when you acquire my store. I actually wrote about this on LinkedIn, the add backs, as it's called. Now, ultimately, sometimes buyer number 2 will pay a premium. Let's say your industry trades at 3 times profit. That's the median. Buyer number 2 is a strategic. They want the location. They know how to do it. They can create synergies. They can extract costs from the business because they already have an overhead that does those things. They'd be willing to pay 3.5x over somebody who just wants to own your convenience store. Maybe they're a store manager, somebody else, and they want to run their own thing and change it, add stuff.
Mm-hmm. You referred to the add back. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Can you expand upon that concept a bit?
Sure. Profit for most businesses is stated as EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. EBITDA excludes the salary for the owner, just so you know, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There's another expression called seller's discretionary earnings, SDE. That includes the salary. That's sort of the total compensation an owner can receive, a total benefit. But I prefer to use EBITDA because it's a real clean standard. The idea of the add backs is to say your company, if it's a corporation, pays income taxes, has some interest on business loans. And most businesses have some level of depreciation, and some may have amortization as well. So all of those elements, again, there's $100,000 of net operating income. There might be 10 or 20 or 30 or $100,000 of those other elements. That all gets added back because some of it's just accounting gimmickry to reduce taxation. And some of it, like interest on a business loan, you add that back to the profits or the adjusted EBITDA because someone buying the business may not have a business loan, or they will have a level of interest that they're paying. Therefore, they need to understand that adjusted EBITDA. The guy who decides to replace his storm windows and charge to the company as supplies, that's an add back. The buyer is not going to recur that expense again.
Right. So there's 2 sides to this coin. And for the moment, let's look at the seller as a small business owner. Let's go back to the convenience store that you talked about. I think that's rather convenient. Leave it at that. I have been in business for, maybe it's a family business. I've been in business for 60 years, but I'm the end of the line. My children have no interest in continuing this business. They don't think it's desirable for them. I have essentially gotten to the point where, yes, I've built a good clientele. People are coming to my store. They know me. I know them. I know what they want. I, necessarily bring in the sorts of inventory that appeals to them and so on and so forth. In other words, I'm your neighborhood shop. Okay. So all this time and effort that I have spent in building this reputation, building this store that's providing for this community, one of my biggest concerns is that when I retire, sell the business, is that it all goes away. Now, I know that I can't continue because I have gotten to that point, that age, health matters, whatever it might be. I have to move away. So as a business owner in that position, I'm going to take the emotional side out of it because I realize that's not something any of us can realistically address. That's a one-to-one situation. It's personal. But aside from the emotional aspect, what kind of guidance does someone like yourself bring to that business owner? And I hope that's not asking too much here, but I presume that in your role, you're doing vastly more than just marrying potential buyer and seller. There's got to be more to it than that.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I start with is a business valuation. The valuation that I would do is for purposes of selling to a third party. We could say, for example, your adjusted EBITDA is, you take 100,000, your adjusted EBITDA is 150. And go out and then get comps. They're trying to find 20 or 30 different companies that may have transacted similar size in the last 3 to 5 years. That gives me a sense of that $150,000 of profit based on the industry. I'm going to use 3x to say, all right, your business could be worth as much as $450,000 to a buyer, plus or minus 10%, because that's the variable depending on who the buyer is. But you can help them understand what is your compound annual growth rate. If it's 2%, that's going to get one kind of a buyer. If a business is growing 10% a year, that's a different kind of buyer. What's been driving that? Obviously, our economy has been in complete crazy turmoil the last 5 years with COVID, getting out of COVID, supply chain issues, and now more recently tariffs. It's a lot of turmoil, but buyers, particularly sophisticated strategic buyers, industry buyers, they've been through all that too. So they're like, okay, we get it. And that's why it's important in many ways to understand who could be the best buyer for your business. Often it's an industry player because it's efficient to sell to somebody that already knows the industry, already knows how to do it. But there are times when you get a business that, this is 7-Eleven down the street. 7-Eleven's not interested in buying it. And so now it's a question of somebody who wants that because they could do something else with it. Let's suppose you never wanted to get into prepared foods, sandwiches and such. You just chose not to. Right. Someone else could come in and say, geez, my lease says I'm allowed to sell prepared foods. So you find a distributor who can deliver sandwiches to you every day. You take out a row of Coca-Cola or whatever else. You say, hey, now we have sandwiches here. Right. And now you've got people like, wow. So that's the growth opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so taking the time to understand the opportunities that a buyer might have in the business. And on one hand, identify them. And the other, you have to justify. If it's such an opportunity, why haven't you done it? I don't want to bring in a refrigerator. I don't want to set up the new relationship, and so forth, but somebody else. You could have a situation where a convenience store doesn't have a beer and wine license. A lot of convenience stores are allowed to do that. And you may have tried in the past. It was too hard. It's this, that, whatever, and you give up. Somebody else may have 2 or 3 or 4 different convenience stores where they already have beer and wine licenses. So they can go before the liquor commission and say, we have a great track record. We know how to do this. We'd like a license. They get the license. And all of a sudden, again, they're adding on a layer of profitability that you as the seller couldn't get or chose not to get.
Presumably the prospective buyer is entertaining these things as they go into that search process. They're already thinking ahead as to what can I potentially do with this? In other words, what's on the table is not all that there is there for me.
Let's suppose a corporation has decided, and again, one of the big convenience store chains around here just went through that, and they decided they had locations that had gasoline fuel sales and a bunch that didn't. And the company that acquired this chain, local chain, is in the fuels business. And so they made a very strategic decision. He says, I know you've got literally 1,500 stores, but 500 of them don't sell fuel. They're going to sell those all off. You as an independent could then say, well, gee, I'm competing with so-and-so off the street. Well, that location may not even be that great a location for that corporation. Let me just shut it down and turn it into a fruit stand or something, right?
Right.
You need to be aware of your competition, what's happening out there.
When you were engaged in the purchase of companies, or sale of companies. Is it similar to real estate where the realtor represents the buyer, not the seller? Or does it go both ways?
The opposite. Typically in M&A, you have to choose a side. So I'm a sell side agent, if you will. Brokers, some people use the word, or advisor is the word I like to use. So I represent the seller. They're my boss in this deal. And my job is to help fulfill their goals, one of which is some financial outcome. When I'm negotiating with the enemy, as I like to say, the buyers know that. I don't represent them. I have to disclose everything the owner has disclosed to me, and that's it. Anything else, it is caveat emptor. The buyer must do their due diligence. I prepare what's called a data room that's got all the financials, tax returns, and all that other stuff, licenses, everything that goes with it. And then I have to tell them how I made my adjustments. I have to justify my adjustments to that EBITDA. I'm negotiating with the other side, but I don't represent them.
Okay.
They may have their own representation. Often for very small transactions, buyers do not have their own representation, other than they may have their own attorney or their own accountant take a look at it. Much more sophisticated businesses, both sides have some kind of M&A advisor helping them.
You said that persons such as yourself have to choose a side. So are you saying that there are those who actually do represent the buyer, or?
Yeah, there are buy-side advisors. There are a number of people who work with private equity firms, outsource corporate development for them. There are other folks who would work with a strategic buyer. Again, someone who owns 14 convenience stores, they want to buy more, so they will pay somebody to call convenience store owners and say, I represent a buyer. Would you be interested in discussing a sale? Understanding that you as the seller, in that case, you're kind of naked out there. You don't have somebody representing your interests, because the guy who's representing the other side, he has no fiduciary responsibility yet. All his responsibility is to the person writing his paycheck.
Okay. So let's go back to the convenience store. In my story, I'm ready to depart. I don't have a successor. How do I begin the process then of selling? I presume naturally that one could sell on their own.
Yes, it can be done. I don't advise it unless you've sold other businesses before.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what are the pitfalls that I should be aware of? If I think I can go off and sell it by myself, what am I likely to miss?
Well, essentially, you're taking on a second full-time job. If you're already working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, do you really want to work another 10, 20, or 30 hours a week? Because that's really the big issue. The other part is, if you haven't sold a business before, you don't know what the expectations are. You don't know how to set up a data room, how to do your own business valuation. You don't know how to prepare the marketing materials known as a confidential information memorandum, or a SIM for short. All of those things are what a professional M&A advisor will do for you. The other part is you have to find a market, and you got to find the buyers. Now, it is true, most people who run a business have competitors. They have relationships with some of their competitors, friendly or otherwise. And you can think of, well, hey, here's 6 people who have said to me over the last 20 years, geez, Paul, if you ever feel like selling your convenience store, think of me. Great. But they're not your friend when it comes to buying your business. Money talks, everything else walks. So it is wise to have some kind of representation. Depending on the nature of the business, you've got to figure out who can represent. So very small businesses, it's typically some kind of business broker. There are some online marketplaces which also have paid advisors, and they can be more affordable. Once you're getting a business that, say, has $500,000 or $1 million of EBITDA, that's when you're getting up to the real M&A folks. You'll be given a lot more services. They cost money, but you can get a lot more services and you represent it. It's like selling a house. I could sell my house. I could clear all the crap out of my attic and my basement. I've owned a number of homes over the years. Then you can buy an ad on Zillow today. Just boom, for sale by owner. You can run an open house. But if you don't know how to disclose all, and I happen to be cold real estate license, I don't really talk about it too much because that's not what I do. I sell businesses, but sometimes I sell a real estate related to it. But you have to know what the state rules are. You violate those as a seller, you can be in big trouble. It is better if possible, to get advice selling your business, because you'll prepare the information that a buyer's expecting. You'll have somebody who's doing all the hard work, the slog of talking to all the different potential buyers. And there are a lot of looky-loos who, oh, I really want to buy a business, and they're clueless. Or they want to just have you become the bank. In other words, I don't really have any money, but I'll pay you for your business. I'm going to take 5 years to pay it, and I'm going to pay you out of the profits.
Yeah.
That can be part of a transaction, but it's not as possible to do all of it that way.
There's so many variables and things that the average business owner is not going to be aware of or know what to do with. And that's where people like yourself come into play. When it comes to the way that an M&A advisor is paid, is it typically commission-based, or is it upfront, a certain fee? How does that work?
Sure, it's a blend. Virtually everybody who's any good at this is going to require some upfront payment, called a retainer. For other folks, it's a marketing fee. For very small businesses, a broker might charge a marketing fee. And then it's a percentage of the transaction. And it can be as high as, for very small companies, it can be as high as 10 or 12%. For larger businesses, it can be as small as 0.1%, multi-billion-dollar transaction.
Right.
And everything in between.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is really enlightening for me. I like you dearly, but I know I won't be taking advantage of your services because I'm committed to the notion that when I'm done, I'm done. But I do thank you for all this information. I think it is important and useful to small business people, because I truly believe that a lot of people don't even think it's worth entertaining the notion. I think that what you've done is you've opened up the door to say, well, it doesn't hurt to take a look inside. There are people out here that can support you in that process. So before we wrap up here, I was just wondering if there's anything you'd like to leave us with, any last things you'd like to impart?
Yeah, I would say if you are considering selling your business, pick a date in the future, 10 years from now, 3 years from now, and an actual date, circle it, January 31st, 2021. Because now it's a goal, right, that you can achieve. How do I build towards that date? And ask your accountant, like, what do I need to do to improve profitability? Look around. Is your bathroom clean? I have this thing called the toilet test when I go see a new customer. I go in and see what it is. If it's clean and neat, this guy probably runs a clean business. If it's disgusting, I'm probably not going to represent this guy. So those are a few little things to think about.
The toilet test. I can't believe it. I love it. By the way, mine would be clean if it came down to that. At least I'd like to hope so.
I'm glad to hear that.
Well, folks, our time is up. Again, I want to thank my guest, Paul Cronin. Paul, it has been a pleasure talking to you, and you have brought some great information to the table. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my great pleasure, Ed.
All right. Thank you, sir. This is Ed Drozda, a small business doctor, and here at the Water Trough, I want to wish you a healthy business.